Things have been relatively quiet on the realignment front in the last couple of months, which is probably a good thing. At least in the FBS level, things have been relatively quiet. In the FCS, everybody's jumping from CAA to Patriot League. It's a whole mess. But at FBS, after the split between the Mountain West and all of basically the state schools from the Mountain West going to the Pac-12, there hasn't been a whole lot of movement. UTEP is going to join the Mountain West. Northern Illinois is going to join the Mountain West. And that leaves the Mountain West with 9 teams. It also leaves the Pac-12 with 7 teams. You got to have 8, at least, in the NCAA's eyes. And there has been a lot of talk about who could be that school for the Pac-12. Furthermore, who could be the next edition for the Mountain West. And it certainly feels as if Texas State has all of the power and all of the leverage, because not only is the Mountain West likely looking for another team, because they don't want to be at uneven number, and the Pac-12 needs an extra member to get up to essentially real conference status. They're going to go from Pinocchio to a real boy should they add somebody. And there aren't a bunch of FCS programs that make a ton of sense for the Pac-12 to try to elevate. And also, in the Pac-12's eyes, they're going to try to assert that they are a Power 5 conference, baby, that they are just the same as they were when the conference included USC, UCLA, Arizona State, Colorado, etc. Except that nobody's going to believe that just because you keep the name and now you have Fresno State and Colorado State means that you're the same thing as USC and Colorado. Nah, ain't nobody going to buy that. And it doesn't help your legitimacy if you are bringing up schools from the FCS, because can you imagine the Big 10, Big 12, SEC, ACC plucking schools from the FCS to join their conference? No, you can't, because it wouldn't happen. So there's going to be, at some point, either the Pac-12 is going to have to entice somebody from the current Mountain West, which feels somewhat unlikely because they're finalizing things to make sure that they're all still one and the same and everybody's hunky-dory and happy with how things are going. Or they're going to have to get somebody else. Texas State is somebody else. Meanwhile, the Mountain West needs to add schools or a school to get to that even number where they can play the right number of conference games they want to play and also don't have a week every week throughout the season where one of their schools has an off week. That is a bad thing, where you're constantly like, hey, UConn, you trying to play some Mountain West football? No, they're not. So Texas State is coveting. But then meanwhile, the Sun Belt has 14 schools. They have 2 divisions of 7. You know what would losing a member would do to the Sun Belt? It would cause havoc, because then you have to figure out, who do you replace Texas State with if you're the Sun Belt? Do you pick somebody from Conference USA? Do you go big game hunting and try to pick somebody out from the American? Do you call somebody up from FCS? Is the Mid-American Conference now in play if Northern Illinois is going to consider playing in the Mountain West? Not even consider. If they're going to join the Mountain West, which they are, that would lead you to believe that somebody else in the MAC is ripe for the picking, right? Could an Ohio or a Miami be somebody that joins the Sun Belt Conference? I think you have to ask those questions, because even 10 years ago, that would sound preposterous. It would be a ridiculous thing to ask. That's such a dumb question. Why in the world would a school in Illinois, an hour and a half west of Chicago, be playing in the same college football conference as Hawaii? But all that stuff has been thrown out the window. And now we're at a point where I think maybe potentially the most unlikely card holder that you could have imagined 10 years ago. Texas State is now holding the cards to the next round of realignment in college football. And that to me is insanely interesting because Texas State is not in a, uber huge major television market. It's part of the Austin TV market, which is, it's a good college football market because everybody in Texas, for the most part, cares about the Longhorns, but the Bobcats aren't necessarily high on the list. It's not far from Austin, and it's not of the desirable Texas television markets. Austin is well behind Dallas, Houston, San Antonio. It's just not there. And yet, I would venture to bet you that Texas State is sitting there wondering what their best options are between the Pac-12, the Mountain West, or staying in the Sun Belt. And knowing kind of full well that whatever they decide to do is likely to touch off the next round of college football realignment. Even if the decision is, let's stay where we are in the Sun Belt, let's not do anything, it's still likely to touch off the next round of college football realignment. And thus, you have to consider that as an option. Do you still like your conference if XYZ happens? It's almost like being in the NFL draft war room and having to run through a mock draft of going, okay, if we do XYZ, and really that plays out somewhat easily for Texas State if they say, hey, we're going to join the Pac-12. All right, we're the 8th member. We're now going to get home games against Gonzaga in basketball. Holy hell, who would have ever imagined that a school like Gonzaga is going to be on the reg playing games in San Marcos? That's unreal. That's probably a nice thing to consider. Also, you have to consider that you are Texas State. You are located in Central Texas. And if you're going to play all of your games in Colorado and California, that could be a problem. But there's all sorts of things to wonder. Really, the mock draft quasi exercise starts when Texas State has to consider what we're going to do if we stand pat. If we just say, you know what, we like things in the Sun Belt West, and we're going to stay right here. Because if they do nothing, the Pac-12 is still going to need to add somebody. And the chances that that affects them, it feels pretty high. So a school that is still kind of in their infancy in the FBS at this level holds the cards for literally everybody else in the group of 5. And I find that wholly interesting, that there's not a part of that to me that's boring, because there are so many different decisions that have to be made, so many different factors that have to be weighed, and so many different dominoes that could potentially fall, or I guess better yet, will fall, depending on what they decide. And I find that to be so fascinating that I'm going to be stuck to the edge of my seat waiting to find out what happens, because while there has been a lull, while it hasn't been at the forefront of decision making, because so many college conferences, administrators, athletic departments, football programs have been worried about what the NIL and what the House settlement looks like by how in the hell we're going to pay our college football players. There have been other pots on the burner simmering. Now, this one was boiling, and it was about to boil over, and they need to focus all of their attention on the House settlement pot. But now that that is relatively resolved, we can go back to, okay, so what's the Pac-12 going to do? And that's a really interesting question. And when the foremost thought process is, it's Texas State or bust, baby. The Bobcats hold all of the cards. And while that Sounds like a really envious position to be in. While everybody would probably think, God, the deals I could negotiate if everybody in the group of 5 college football world was banking on me. It's also slightly terrifying because if you make the wrong decision, it could be catastrophic to your athletic program. It could be damaging for decades, because I'm here to tell you that I bet you Tulane wishes that they were still in the SEC. If you were to get some, if you were to ask the administrators who got Tulane out of the SEC, that if they could have looked in the crystal ball and seen what the SEC is today, that I'm here to tell you Tulane probably wishes they were still there. I would bet you that the University of Chicago, maybe not, they're a little bit pretentious. The University of Chicago probably wishes they were still in the Big Ten, all things considered. They're not, and they don't get a redo. You generally don't get to do this again, like TCU and Houston joining Power 4 conferences again. Generally, you don't get that second opportunity. You don't get to right the wrongs that have happened. And that's a really high-pressure situation to be in. So while it's cool that Texas State holds all those cards, I think you would be a borderline sociopath if you didn't also recognize, if we make the wrong decision, this is slightly terrifying. So you got to play your cards right, even though you've got all of the leverage and you're holding the cards that so many other schools wish they had. What are your thoughts? If you were the Texas State Athletic Department, what are you doing? You going to the Pac-12? You going to the Mountain West? You staying pat? Want to know your thoughts below. And if it's not Texas State, who should the Pac-12 target to be their next conference member? Want to know your thoughts in the comments below. That'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. I appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you're getting all the great college football content we're pumping out. If you're listening on the podcast feed, drop a 5-star review. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. I'll see you tomorrow for another episode of the Daily Huddle.